Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to go over 10 of the biggest mistakes healers make while healing dungeons in World of Warcraft Mythic Plus. I've been healing for a long time on many different classes, and many of these lessons I've learned from my own mistakes, others I've seen in countless videos of other players trying to improve their gameplay. I hope you can use these things to take your dungeon healing game to the next level and achieve new heights in the War Within. Without waiting too much longer, let's get straight to the list. First off is not using your tank external cooldown enough. Each healer except for Shaman has a single target medium cooldown ability that can be used on a party member to reduce the damage they take, increase their healing, or provide some sort of major damage absorb. With the changes to tank survivability in dungeons, this cooldown is almost always reserved for the tank. In pug scenarios, however, as a healer it can feel awkward to use when there's no communication with that tank knowing when to use it. The best solution is obviously to perfectly time it during dangerous pulls when the tank needs it the most, but that can be difficult with no comms. It's important when you're using the cooldown that you're using it often though, and most healers just aren't using it often enough. If you find yourself not pressing these buttons frequently, make it a point to just send it on the tank every time they walk into a pull and it's available. If it comes up during the pull, just throw it on them as long as there's still enough enemies to worry about. This is effective not only because it's getting value, but you're also building some synergy with the tank in your group. Once the tank realizes that you're sending it on cooldown right away, they can start planning their stuff around it, maybe being a bit more aggressive early on the pull. It might not be the optimal time to use it, but it is consistent and it'll get you in the habit of getting good value out of this ability. The life of a healer is quite a bit different from a DPS. As a DPS, if your output is slacking a bit, it becomes apparent right away as the other two DPS in the group are going to be doing more damage than you. It's honestly like a constant competition, and it helps push DPS players into playing cleaner and better. Healers, on the other hand, not only don't have this competition, but often are juggling other things than just output. That's why the number 2 mistake is a sloppy rotation. Very often, healers have some of the least effective rotations that I've seen. You aren't always pressed to heal at 100% efficiency, and the healing meters don't work the same way that DPS ones do to kick you into high gear. Healers often get complacent and don't quite push themselves to play perfectly all the time, so when things go wrong, it's more likely to spiral into a wipe. Make sure you're always using your most efficient heals and thinking about the correct spells to cast, even if it isn't always entirely necessary at every moment. Recording your gameplay to watch back later is absolutely essential for becoming a great healer, because then it's easy to make sure that you're maintaining the right spells, not missing important cooldowns or procs. It's okay to not play perfect. I mean, healing is a complicated role, but you should always strive to play as well as you can. Once you get to the really tough boss fights and encounters in higher level dungeons, you'll be glad you did. Next on the list is a less common mistake, but it can be deadly to a run, and that's getting in combat with an accidental pack of mobs. We've all been there. The group leader wants to do some sneaky maneuver to get through a pack. Not everyone can be prepared though, especially not that clueless hunter in your group that can barely get themselves dressed in the morning, let alone control their pet. As your group sneaks by, the hunter obviously pulls this pack and the mobs just start running straight towards your team. As a healer, you're usually paying attention and aware of the group status, and your first instinct is just to spring into action, save your team members, and try and recover. However, very often the situation just isn't savable. Even if it is, you may end up wasting more time or combat reses than it's even worth. The absolute best thing you can do as a healer in this situation is stay out of combat. If you have something activate stealth or fade and back away from the pack, let the players who pulled the pack just die and then quickly get them back up and continue on with your team's normal strategy. Very often your tank isn't going to be ready to pick up the pack if the group wants to fight, so if you do end up getting in combat with that pack, make sure that your group is ready. Make sure your tank actually grabs all the mobs, activates their mitigation, then decide to, okay, I'm going to heal and keep everybody up. But being honest though, staying back, resing, and then continuing the plan is almost always better than trying to fight an unnecessary and difficult pack, and if you get yourself killed, you may end up in a situation where your team doesn't have a res and you have to walk back from a graveyard, or you have to spare a combat res. On the topic of getting in combat too early, the next huge mistake I see is healers healing the tank too early in a gather. Every healer knows the feeling that your tank gets hit without mitigation. They lose a huge chunk of their health early. You see it coming and you're like, oh no. Your first instinct, just rush in, try and heal him, get him topped in case something goes wrong. Normally, if your tank gets hit hard, that is the right response, but at the very beginning of the pull, while they're gathering the mobs, it can be dangerous. Oftentimes, in a pack of mobs, if the tank is trying to move them, they may only be tagging one of the mobs. Maybe they can't reach everything, maybe it's too far away, or maybe their main AoE spell is on cooldown. If the tank hasn't touched certain mobs in the pack, when you heal them one single time, it will immediately draw the mob's attention towards you. Not only is this dangerous for you, but from my experience, it almost always throws the tank off and then makes them panic even harder. Mobs on another player is the tank's worst nightmare. It often causes them to abandon their current plans, to run back in, adjust what they want to do on the fly, and try and save you. Experienced tanks will have strategies for how to pull these mobs safely, but let's be honest, in pugs, not everyone will have this down, so be ready for this situation to happen. A good habit if mobs are being pulled is to see the HP of the mobs visible on the nameplates, so you can make sure each mob has been touched by some damage at least once before you heal. Healing generates extremely low threat, so the only times you usually pull threat from healing is when there's no damage on the mob. Number 5 on the top mistakes healers make is just always blaming yourself. Look, we made it this far in the video with me blaming you for every single thing that goes wrong. It's important to adjust to that other side of the mental game as well. When you're playing a healer or a support role, it almost always feels like there's something you could have done because, well, usually there is. And also, many low-level groups just blame the healer for not keeping them alive. I know lots of people who have healer anxiety, not wanting to play in groups and fear of being blamed. This is something that you'll have to slowly learn to live with as you play healer. The fact is, there's just always room to improve and do better. The key is fault doesn't matter. The fact that you could have done X or Y to keep the team alive doesn't really matter that much. Oftentimes, if you look back, there are certain things that almost every single member of the team could have done. It's only the most obvious that the healer could have done something. You always want to have a mindset to improve and learn, but don't dread on your mistakes. Most importantly, don't try and search for fault when things go wrong. Oftentimes, I get asked in my chat as if I'm some sort of moderator, like, oh, whose fault was this death or wipe? I mean, everyone makes mistakes, and let's be honest, we're playing a video game. Fault doesn't matter. Take some time to examine what you can learn for next time and then move on. Another major mistake that healers fall into is not using their AOE crowd control. Maybe they're scared of reducing the diminishing returns by stunning mobs, or they're scared of fearing something and it goes into another pack, or maybe they fake out somebody's kick. Ultimately though, you should be using your AoE disruption very, very often in Mythic Plus. There's just an absolute ton of things that you need to stop. Even just stalling like small tank hits or casts for a few seconds is very valuable. Get in the habit of just sending your AoE crowd control and your single target, honestly, early and often. Sometimes you troll and have unintended consequences, absolutely, but honestly, that's the only way you learn and to figure out when the best times are. And then when it comes to impressing people in pugs to find regular groups to play with, if you're using your tank externals regularly, like I mentioned previously, and effectively CCing mobs and stopping casts, those are the sorts of things that will get you noticed right away. When people see you as a healer trying to not just push the health bars up, but improve the success of the dungeon, they're more likely to stick around. Remember, things have changed a little bit in the War Within. Interruptible abilities will recast if you use disruption against them, so you do want to try and wait until the end of the cast when stopping these to give other people a chance to kick them first. Nearing the top of the list, we have a mistake that every healer is guilty of from time to time: losing focus of their own character or prioritizing the life of someone else and letting yourself die. The difficulty of the healer role has gone up significantly in Dragonflight and is honestly getting even harder. There are so many encounters that test your ability to remain calm under pressure. One of the most common is like a dangerous frontal or a wave of dangerous swirlies during significant group damage. Once you get into more difficult dungeons, when you misstep, these things will just immediately one-shot you. People say your number one job as a healer is to keep your team alive, but I would say your number one job is to keep yourself alive, and I guess the tank. When dodging is required, always focus on your feet first and your party second. It might be scary to just look away from the party frames when people are taking damage, but you're not going to be able to heal them later if you're on the floor. Recognize when these moments are going to happen. First, you want to do your best to keep your party topped before the damage starts and press a defensive if that's available. Then, once the dodge phase starts, just lock in, focus on your survival while only casting party heals that don't require to stare at your frames. Then, once things are safe, go back and check on whatever group members need healing and top them up. Don't allow your eyes to stay glued to your party frames when you need to be dodging. Number 8 on the list, a very important one for speed, is not immediately drinking in between pulls. With dungeons, you usually want to go as fast as possible. Either you're in a time mythic plus or you're just trying to farm loot efficiently in a regular dungeon. As a pack or a boss is ending, you should be moving towards the next pack or objective. Then once you're close enough, start slamming your mana water right away to get the mana back, even if you're fairly high. Just a few sips will add up quickly throughout the dungeon if you're doing this every time you drop combat. You also might think you have enough mana, but you never know when you're going to be stuck in combat, not able to drink for way longer than expected. Do your best to not walk around consistently with like half mana or less just because you think you can. This also can save time later when you actually do need to sit because you're not going to be totally bottomed out. When running dungeons, it's honestly always pretty apparent when a healer is a beginner if they're constantly running out of mana, needing to slow down the team and stop them when their mana isn't topped. And likewise, a team really appreciates when their healer is constantly thinking about their mana, trying to stay topped so that progress can be smooth and steady. Last on my list of the top healer mistakes, and the most common mistake by far, is holding your major cooldowns and abilities way too long. As a DPS, it's pretty logical to just send your big damage cooldown as often as possible because you're trying to do the most damage. The thing is though, healing is time sensitive. Very often when you realize that it's an emergency, it can be too late. While you're healing, take inventory of what you have available, what big spells that you can use, and if you have several things available, just use something as soon as damage starts coming in. For an example, Shaman has Healing Tide Totem, Ascendance, and Spirit Link, each on a 3-minute or shorter cooldown. This means you can use one of these every single minute of the dungeon. Generally, trash packs live about a minute, so you can really be using a big cooldown every single pack that you fight. If you've gone multiple minutes without using something big, unless you have like a specific reason that you know is coming out soon, just throw it out when there becomes a little bit of healing to do. This helps you in so many ways. First, you save mana, as we mentioned earlier, you get everybody topped so you can focus on disrupting, doing some damage, and then you have those heals rolling in case something bad happens, you can act even quicker. Even if you don't know the dungeons and you don't know what to save, you really only need to make sure you have one thing available in case of an emergency, and you can cycle through all your other abilities. Once you learn the dungeons, you'll know exactly when you need to hold specific abilities, and otherwise you can just keep sending stuff to stay ahead. I know it doesn't seem intuitive to just waste your resources all the time, but remember, it's PvE. Your teammates may be zoo animals, but the mobs also will more or less act predictably. They're not going to pull out some secret strategy suddenly when you use something, so keeping everyone constantly healthy can be just as good, if not better, than holding something for an unexpected event. And that concludes my list of 10 healer mistakes that I see most often in Mythic Plus. Well, actually, that was only 9, I guess, but 10 kind of sounded good in the video title. Okay, the 10th healer mistake is not being subscribed to my YouTube and Twitch channel. Thank you very much for watching. I'd appreciate the like and subscribe if you guys thought this video was helpful. More great healer content will be coming for M+ and Raid in the War Within. Happy keying, friends.